Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Centre for Rural Criminology's podcast series. And today we're very pleased to welcome Willie Clack from the University of South Africa. And I'm wondering, Willie, if you just start by providing us with a brief introduction about yourself, the work that you've done in the past, and the work that you're doing currently.
Hi, Alistair and Kyle. I've been in academia. I started my career in corrections. I moved to academia in 1992, and I have a fortunate opportunities in life to have two lives. I'm a farmer and I'm an academic. So eventually my whole career was about corrections, but around about 2000 I had the opportunity to start working with rural crime in South Africa. The first opportunities I had was with guys from the United States, University of North Michigan, and we started doing research on illegal wildlife trafficking, which were focused more on, eventually we decided to do our research on rhino and elephant trafficking, and then we discovered that it's a much bigger problem than only elephants and rhinos. And then we went into small things like abalone and then birds, snakes, all those things. And that's where my whole interest into the whole rural crime actually started. And with my adventures in agriculture and being highly involved in organized agriculture, in 2006, I got introduced to the National Livestock Theft Prevention Forum, and sitting there as an academic, I just realized these people are sitting on a mammoth amount of information that they don't know what to do about. I mean, they collect all this data, they collect all the information, but it's simply being used within a forum. No one talks about it, no one publishes about it. And I originally started to write publications in the popular journals in South Africa, in Afrikaans, which you guys will not be able to understand. And then my colleagues started saying to me, well, we think you should move this into the academic direction. And I started publishing in livestock and livestock theft. Which is kind of like a real passion for me. Ended up today as the national chairperson of the Livestock Theft Prevention Forum in South Africa, with a high involvement still in other spheres of organized agriculture, in the red meat industry. So that's my background. That's where I come from, and and I still farm today. And where I am today, talking to you guys, I'm in the city. So I changed my venue from farm to city for this week, and then I'm going back.
I guess we'll unpack this a little bit as we go, but one of the key things is, notwithstanding that you started off looking at wildlife, and very particularly wildlife found in Africa, elephants and others, but also looking at some of the livestock, there are some of the lessons that can be learnt from your research that is equally applicable anywhere else in the world, like the motivations for the theft in the first place.
Yeah, I do think that the motivation for livestock theft, and when we look at this whole thing and we look at the whole environmental crime series. I mean, and you look at the 4 environmental crime series, and I think the most applicable one is routines activities. And when you get to the motivation of the offender, I do think from my research that I found is that you cannot really distinguish between a motivated offender and the object, because when it gets to economic crimes, the motivation for the offender is normally the object, which is kind of like the driving force and the motivation for this person to commit this crime. But I always do use the examples for people and say, when it gets to livestock theft and you compare it to other economic crimes, is if I steal your cell phone, if I steal your TV or whatever appliances you have in your home, any technology, the surest thing that I do know is that it immediately loses its value. I cannot steal a cell phone for the value of $100 and expect to sell it for the value of $100 because it immediately loses value, which is totally different when it gets to livestock. Livestock never loses its value. If I steal your cow, or I steal your bull, or I steal your calf, or whatever, it's got a value. I can sell it off to an abattoir. I can go and sell it at an auction. I can sell it to someone else, or I can either slaughter it and use it for myself, or I can use it for breeding purposes. Which means that in the case of livestock, it never loses value. And I do think that's the greatest distinguisher between livestock theft and any other crimes that's committed in rural areas, because of this whole motivation. And we can go back and then we can argue as that the main driver for livestock is greed. And then I want to share another thing with you, is because it's one of the things that really interested me when I was still doing a lot of technical assessments for criminal justice in Africa, where I had the opportunity to go to a lot of African countries, and we visited from police to justice to corrections. And we went in the corrections, and we ended up, myself and the guys that's doing the research with us is to, when we are in a prison, to categorize the prisoners. And we ended up going and say, okay, who's between 20 and 25? You guys stand to this side. Who's between 25 and 30? So we did that age category. And then you end up with these people, these criminals in prison over the age of 60. And then you ask them, now, what crimes did you commit? And you have like a 95% chance that it's either murder or livestock theft. And then we went and looked at the whole profile of these guys. We did discover that actually when it gets to livestock theft, is these guys don't never rehabilitate. They will keep on stealing livestock until the day that they die. It's not like your normal criminal, economic criminal who steals out of houses, housebreak and theft and robbery and those, where the criminal career has a tendency to stop around about the age of 40, 45, where it starts diminishing. When it gets to livestock, it just carries on. It never stops. And up until today, we still see that pattern. In South Africa, because livestock theft is a big thing, we have an agreement with correctional services that, well, this was until 2 years ago, because then their whole computer system crashed. But we got a list of all released inmates that was jailed or incarceration for livestock theft. And it was totally true, as we could predict it. If John has been released from prison for livestock theft, you had an 80% chance that he will commit livestock theft again within the first 12 months after being released. And so we're working here with a very unique not a very unique crime, and we're working with a very unique perpetrator. Another thing that we, from our research that we did find...
If I can just interrupt you there and ask, why do you think the repeat offending is so salient in this particular group?
No, I don't know why they keep on repeating, but I do want to relate it back to the value. To the value of the object, in this case, the livestock, and which actually is a big motivating factor for these guys. So that's what we would say is why this is so. Then another unique thing that you find in South Africa that you don't find in any other country in the world is the fact that we keep track of all our livestock theft cases. We keep track of all livestock stolen. So each and every year, after each and every quarter, when our cases get published, we know exactly how many cattle are stolen, how many sheep are stolen, how many goats are stolen, how many chickens, how many horses are stolen. And I haven't found this in any other country in the world, that they keep that information. I mean, believe me or not, our South African police still keep this by hand. It's a hand system. It's not a technology system. So we are highly involved with these people. We talk to them on a weekly basis. And so we get this information. So we know who the perpetrators is that's been released. We know who the new guys on the block is. We know how much they steal. And that's how you carry on. But we also need to acknowledge that just like in all parts of the world, there's guys that's been stealing livestock for the past 20 years, never been caught. Everyone knows about them, but
I think you're right, Willie. It is absolutely the case the world over, and certainly here in Australia, the work that I've been doing in Victoria and Kyle's been doing up in New South Wales is the sheer lack of reporting. And so therefore, the offenders keep on offending. There's nothing that interrupts or disrupts that those patterns of offending.
Yeah, and to talk more about crime in aggregate in rural spaces, I don't think we keep as good track of the issue of farm crime specifically here. New South Wales does okay, especially since the Rural Crime Prevention Team, they'll take dedicated statistics of, how many cattle were stolen in this period or sheep or things like that. But just speaking to rural police officers, not necessarily around cattle theft, because I think the problem pales in comparison, of course, to the amount and actual magnitude of cattle theft in South Africa. But you'll talk to local officers in rural spaces in New South Wales, and they'll know when there's a lot of ram raids or a lot of break and enters or things like that, that a particular person has been released from prison, and therefore, they have an expectation of these offenses and where they're coming from. So it sounds very familiar in terms of policing more broadly in small spaces. Once people re-enter those spaces, there's an expectation that those offenses will continue to occur or begin to occur again.
Yeah, so, but actually, and just to carry on into this whole thing is, I think it was about 2012, 2012, 2013, I had a student coming to me and asked me, I want to do research, but I don't know what to do. I said, you know what it is? I need a profile of a livestock perpetrator. That's what I want to see. And she worked many, many years on it, and it's been published at the end of last year. It's a master's study, and I just convinced her to enroll for the awards, and whatever. So we'll see how it goes and how she is. But it gives you a very, very good background as to how these people look, how they operate, what they do. Things that fascinated me from the study is the fact that in 80% of the cases, they don't know the victim. They don't care who the victim is. All those kind of things that you would expect in rural crime, we would all know. But they don't care. It's all about the object. And routine activities give you all the ways and means how they do go about in identifying the animals, how to decide who they're going to who they're going to target, who's going to be the victims. And what fascinated me as well is the fact that why do they repeatedly steal from X and not from Z? What's the reason? Why don't they go? I mean, these guys are two farmers farming next to one another, but they only steal from the one. And then you kind of like determine, but it's a routine, and they know the place. They get used to it. They know exactly how it works, how it operates, and they don't want to take a chance to go to the other side or to the other person. And then is the whole buffer zone theory. How these people tend to keep something between themselves and the targets. How do they go about? I mean, in South Africa, we've determined that it depends on the mobility of the offender. The more mobile they get, the bigger, the larger the buffers are. Yes. If this guy is on foot, you have a chance of around about 15 to 20 kilometers that they will offend. And as soon as they get into the smaller little trucks, it gets to like 50 kilometers and whatever. And the moment they get into big stuff, they get into big vehicles, big trucks, 18-wheelers, interlinks as we call them. I mean, we had a case in South Africa where cattle was moved for 1,100 kilometers in one night, stolen on a farm and sold on an auction. I do know about the whole white bull story in Armidale and the whole theft from Queensland down to South Australia, but yeah, we still have these cases where lots and lots of animals are stolen. We just had a case now, about 3 weeks ago, where a whole truckload of animals were stolen. 91 weaner calves stolen. So you're looking at R1 million. I mean, it's R1 million in South Africa is a lot of money. Yeah, in Australian dollars, it might be around about 100,000 Australian dollars, but still, I mean, if you look at the economy and you look how it translates, R1 million is R1 million. Doesn't matter in what currency you look at.
I was fascinated by your observation that a lot of the offenders will concentrate themselves in a small area. And a few years ago, I came across this interesting comparison of a theory from the natural sciences and its application to criminal offending. And it's called optimal foraging theory, and adopts that notion that animals, when they find a food source, will just stay there for as long as the food source persists before they move on, because it saves energy, it saves that risk of being taken by another predator and so on and so forth. And that overlap with offending, where they'll just focus, as long as that is uninterrupted, there's no capable guardianship, all of those other key matters around crime prevention, they'll stay there and keep on offending. And this leads on to one of the other points that you made, and it's that there are some people who don't know the people that they're victimising, but conversely, at least here in Australia, there's a lot of farmers who know who the offender is. They know it's John's boy down the street who's knocking off 3 or 4 sheep every now and again, but they also know that he's armed to the hilt and he's got a hot head and he's likely to come back in the middle of the night. And they don't want to do that for fear of that revenge or that retribution. And I'm just wondering to what degree that might also occur in South Africa.
You know what? It does occur. Where the people do know, and I think that's where there's a lot of similarities in the whole of the world. You can go and read research and whatever, and then you will find that we know who the perpetrator is, but we're not prepared to go and give this guy up because of fear. One of the things, and then as what is your standing in the community? I mean, as now you go and accuse John's son of stealing whatever, and you're breaking up family relations, you're breaking up a good community relations, all those kind of things. And for that reason, we don't report the crime. And I think that's quite obvious all over the world that those things do happen. And yeah, it does annoy me. I must be honest with you. So I just had the case in my own family 4 weeks ago, where animals were stolen, and because of the CCTV cameras that's up in the rural areas in South Africa and all these kind of things, quickly determined who was the perpetrator. Being a white lady, she stays really 8 kilometers from where I'm from. And what did they decide? No, they're not going to report crime to the police because of all the standings in the community and how we feel and what we do. So, yeah, I do think that's a world phenomenon. And as long as that's going to be our attitude, we're not going to make a decision to Livestock.
In New South Wales, it was one of the most common reasons for not reporting was fear of retaliation, because they know the offender, and not necessarily just physical retaliation, but social, cultural retaliation. That is ostracism, or, being seen as someone who dobbed someone in or something like that. But going back to what you were saying, kind of about the magnitude and scale and the kind of type of career criminal that you find over there, it sounds like there's a bit more of an organized element to this issue in South Africa. Is that the case?
Definitely. As we have, over the years, what we determine is that about 13% of our livestock theft is for survival. I mean, it's because of it's for pure survival, as I need to put food on the table, I need to provide, and those kind. And we have a name for it in South Africa. It's called potslachten, which is actually an Afrikaans word, but if you directly translate it, it means that I am slaughtering for my pot. I mean, I'm slaughtering to eat, I'm stealing to eat. And those are 13%. But 87% of our livestock theft is organized in nature, if you go and look at the definition of organized crime. And what we've also found is that it's normally these syndicates form and they dissolve very quickly. As I have identified, say, for instance, I want to go and steal 20 head of cattle from John, but I need the expertise of other 3 or 4 guys. I will get them in. We will do we will commit the offense. We will steal whatever we want. And after we've distributed or the proceeds of the crime between ourselves, is we just disappear and we get out of one another's lives. And then, and say 3 months' time or whatever, I identify someone else, and then I get another group of people together. But it is strange is how these people connect. And a lot of their connections comes from the best universities in the world, and that we call prison. That's where they learn. That's where they get their whole social minds going. That's where they start socializing. And that is the area with which they function. So, yeah, you will find them there.
It sounds, though, like there's no continuous kind of traditional organized crime group, but individuals involved in this space that tend to aggregate with one another, commit the crime, dissolve, and then find another group, commit the crime, dissolve, which might make it a bit more difficult to address.
Yeah, but you know what is, I do think that all over the world we do have this problem of actually catching the perpetrators. It's not easy, and putting them behind bars is even more difficult. But what also distinguishes South Africa, I mean, I've been in many parts of the world and whatever, is that South Africa has got a dedicated livestock theft and endangered species unit within the police force. Mm. We've got 90 units all over the country, coordinated by each unit. Each province has got a coordinator, and then every province has got its own stock theft units. And depending on the amount of stock stolen in that particular province or region, will determine the amount of units you do have. We have a province, or the Eastern Cape province in South Africa is prone to livestock pest. 22 of the units is in that particular province, and then the more west you go, it's like in Australia. The more west you go in South Africa as well, the more arid it becomes, the less animals there are, and then automatically there's less livestock pest. But yeah, I do think that's a distinguishing factor, and we invited people from the US, from Australia, to come over to South Africa to come and investigate, see how we're doing it, what we're doing, and maybe that will trigger something in Australia. I do know that I think in Victoria, you also have a dedicated unit for rural crimes, Alistair.
Yeah, there's a farm crime liaison officers unit. One of the challenges is that they're not all dedicated full-time officers. So when there is occasions where there's volume crimes occurring in a rural location, that will become the focus of activity, rather than other places like New South Wales or in South Africa or in many places in the UK where all they do is the rural crime. So that itself is a challenge,
Yeah, farm crime specifically. I think the New South Wales Police definition is farm that impacts upon the function of the pastoral, agricultural, and aquacultural industries. And they're very adamant that that is the only thing that they focus on. So not crime in rural communities, but crime that impacts on these industries. And so having that dedicated team is quite novel out here in Australia thus far.
But I must say that over the course of the last 10 years, policing organisations the world over have gone ahead in leaps and bounds. It's now much more at the focal point of decision makers than it was even just 5 years ago in many jurisdictions, where senior police officers based in capital cities are now recognising that there are real harms that occur from this type of offending.
Yeah. So the New South Wales Police unrolled Operation Stock Check almost a year ago now. And basically that is the kind of pulling over of vehicles carrying stock and ensuring that the stock are identifiable and they can prove ownership. And this started in New South Wales. And I'm pretty sure every single state's police force, it's a bit tricky here, right? Because you have state-based police forces. You have the AFP, but the state-based police forces often don't play to the same tune. But on this particular issue, increasingly, they seem to be really sharing in information and sharing in approaches to manage the issue. So Operation Stock Check is one example of something that has gone Australia-wide now, except for South Australia. My understanding is because there's some legal boundaries that they cannot pull over these vehicles there. So that stops them from doing so. But Alistair's right, the world over, but focused in Australia for a second, is that there's definitely some momentum and attention behind actually intervening, particularly I think being driven a lot by biosecurity threats and stuff like that, but definitely more attention even at a policy level.
Just in terms of, Willie, policing in local communities, I'm just wondering if you could comment for a little while on what level of engagement there is between those local rural-based police and the communities that they serve. What's the sort of the level of interaction and engagement with farmers?
Now, there's what happened in South Africa is that we do have community policing forums, and they are within the rural areas as well. What we do find is, and this is based on the history of South Africa, is that it's actually only the farmers themselves that's involved in the community police forums. The rest of the communities is not highly involved. So you kind of like get a divide. Although the farmers are highly involved, the rest of the communities are not. So the people in the rural towns is not involved. The people in the, as we call it, the townships is not involved. So you do have a lot, you do have a big lack of information sharing, because the information is just within one group in society. But, and I would always say is this depends, and it will differ from location to location, from police station to police station, and it depends on your type of personalities. You get guys that really wants to be involved and they're highly involved and they make a difference. And then you get the others that just simply, you know what, it's not my job. I don't want to be involved. I don't want to do anything to do with it. And yeah, I just wrote a paper for the International Criminal Justice Review, and I did a kind of like research on the use of CCTV and the involvement of the people and how they go about. And I was quite astounded by the fact that CCTV, well, it's just been introduced in our rural areas for the past 3-4 years, had no impact. There's no reduction in crime. I mean, it depends on areas. In one area, crime goes down, and the other ones, I mean, the one that had the biggest impact on crime, 33% reduction in livestock theft. But on the contrary, there was an increase in other jurisdictions of 43% with the same technology. So the question is, does CCTV or all these things make a real impact? And my finding is no. It will depend on your involvement of your community with your criminal justice system. If that's not functioning, it's not going to make any difference.
Yeah, it gets back to that classic risk-reward analysis. If you don't think that you're going to get caught, or if you're the persistent, motivated offender, the offending will keep on occurring.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
Willie, can we backtrack for a second? We probably should have opened with this. Can you tell us a little bit, for particularly Australian viewers or viewers not from South Africa, about the scale, the sheer magnitude of the problem out there, and maybe how it compares, for instance, to your knowledge of Australia and things like that?
You know, currently in South Africa, the magnitude is we're losing around about 66,000 head of cattle per year, which if you go and calculate it, it boils down to around about 198 head of cattle per day, which is quite significant. If you go and look at sheep, you're looking around about 110,000, which calculates to around about 254 head of sheep per day. And then we do go to goats as well, and they are around about 50,000 per year, which goes to around about 160 per day. So that's a magnitude of the whole problem in the country. Yeah, economically, we're looking at about, in our currency, around about 1.4 billion rand per year. But the thing that you never need to forget is the fact that only 23% of livestock theft in South Africa is reported. So 77% of our livestock theft is not reported. So when we talk about these numbers and these figures, we're talking about those that are reported and that we know of. I mean, there's 77% that we don't know. But we do believe that the ones that we don't know of is those ones with lower magnitude. It's the smaller amounts, it's the one head of cattle, 2 heads of cattle, or whatever. The moment these things tend to get big, people tend to report it too. But what we also found that is with the whole argument of retaliation and those things is if people do find that it is John that stole their animals and they do get the animals back, they don't report it as well.
Or alternatively, they know that the next door neighbour, John, has stolen 6 head of sheep, but they also know that they've been put into the freezer for consumption. Yeah. So they don't actually, there's no sort of checks and balances with the legal abattoirs. There's no signs of an illegal abattoir being towed around. They've just been butchered and the carcass is dumped.
You know, is what happened, what we have very much in South Africa, and I will send you some photos if you want to, but it's not beautiful to see, and it's not for the sensitive people, because in South Africa we have this thing that we call bush slaughtering.
Yeah, we've been getting a little bit of here in New South Wales. Speaking with the police, I've seen some of the pictures here.
So they will enter into a pen and whatever, and they will just take machetes and start chopping up this animal while it's still alive. And we have a lot of that. And what we found in the cases of cattle, normally around about between 4 and 6 heads of cattle are slaughtered in the veld at night and then removed. And in the case of sheep, it will go to amounts like 40, 50 that's just been slaughtered. The skin is just left there and they're gone with all the meat. So it's one of those things. I mean, it's, as I say, if you don't have a tough stomach, don't watch it. I mean, it's not beautiful to see. It's awful. And yeah, what we've seen with this is you can clearly see the modus operandi, and you know exactly it's the same bunch of guys doing it all over, because I mean, they just simply leave their marks all over. It's just like you always see is, yeah, when you get to this crime scene, this is how it looks. This is where they leave the knife. This is what they do with the cow's udder. This is what they do with the bull's genitals. And so they leave it always in the same place, the same manner. So you do know it's the same group of people that's doing it. And what we've seen is because in our case, it's more around the bigger cities. But what we've seen as well as and discovered is that they move a lot around. The moment that we start focusing on one area, they just move to the others. If they operating in the south at the moment and we start focusing there, they will move to the west. The moment you move to the west, they will start to move to the east of the city. So that we've seen. But I will send Carl some pictures on this, and you guys can show it to the world if maybe you want to, because it's public. It's publicly available, and unfortunately, I need to look at this stuff every week, and it's not good. As my wife always says, it's just delete it from my phone. Please.
It serves it really serves to underscore how multitudinal this issue is. It's not simply a sheep being stolen, but as you say, there's the devastation, the financial devastation to the farmer, the social impacts on them. There's biosecurity issues. If the fleece and the carcass is being left and the meat's being taken, there's no sort of oversight with food safety and hygiene standards at all either.
Yeah.
No, nothing. And I think Cressida Smith just did a paper, I think last year, on the emotional impact of the crimes on farmers. And I do think it's something that we all need to start looking at, because I do think that the emotional impact is much larger than any one of us can actually determine or imagine. And I would think that we will need to start looking at that.
Yeah, coming out of the New South Wales
research academic point of view, yeah.
Coming out of the New South Wales farm crime survey, had about 20% indicated victimization of harm to their animals, but a much higher percent, over 50, of actual fear of harm for their animals. So that is one of their primary concerns, is the harm being brought about by whether it be the illegal hunting issues or the trespassing or the actual theft of the cattle and things like that. So.
And a great initiative from a few years ago that was rolled out by certain police officers here in Victoria was setting up farm crime expos, where they'd gather together people who are selling different technologies that have presentations from the police, from local government, from the Farmers Federation. But importantly too, they got the local health networks to come along and talk about particularly men's health. Some of those things, old blokes particularly are not going to open up about their emotions and confront some of those things openly. And it's a real problem.
No, I just think we need to look at those things. But
just to contextualize for people watching, in New South Wales, an average between 2015 and 2020 was 1,800 cattle stolen and 16,000 sheep stolen, and at about 4 million a year. That doesn't take into account on costs, but a little bit of a difference there between the South African context.
Yeah, and I do think, but we, as from a Western point of view, and more the European Eurocentric way, is there's regions that we don't focus on. And there's one region in called the Karamoja region, which is it's in Kenya, Uganda, and in Ethiopia, in that area, which is the area in the world with the most livestock-prone area, and where livestock is not stolen, it's robbed by gunpoint. So, I mean, a lot of people don't know about this, but there's a lot of animals stolen there simply just by gunpoint. It's robbed. It's not it's not theft, it's robbery. So, yeah, I do think we don't always realize how big and what the magnitude of this crime in the world is, because a lot of it just gets swept under the carpet and we tend to forget about it.
So is that robbery, is that occurring on the farm, or is it also occurring when people are transporting vehicles? So it's like modern day bush ranging.
In any manner, Alistair. They do, as we would say, hijack vehicles. They do simply just go into, because, I mean, if you go that part of Africa, there's no cities or whatever, it's real rural areas. They would just come with a gun and they would hold up these people and just take all the animals from the pens. And there they go. Things do happen. And, well, because livestock theft and the research on livestock theft is my passion, I always ask the question is, why don't we see more of this? Why don't we see more research on this stuff? Because it's a rural crime that really affects a lot of people. But yeah, I do think that rural is currently captivating our minds. We are thinking rural, and a lot of our academics are starting to think rural, but not specific crimes. And our focus is on violence and violence against women in rural areas and those kind of things. But yeah, as a farmer myself, I do think I have a little bit of a different look towards these things.
And can you speak a little bit about that? I was trying to touch on that at the beginning, your experience in farming, how that plays into your research, maybe any of your own experiences with farm crime yourself.
You know, yeah, I've been farming for the past, 36 years, on a part-time basis. And I do have the opportunity to be on the farm quite frequently. I mean, I travel between the university and the farm very often, and I tend to stay there quite often. But when we look at farm crimes, I mean, I'm interested in the whole livestock theft phenomenon. That's my interest. But all around me, there's a lot of other crimes that occurs, and what's a big problem in South Africa. Our biggest concern in the South African sense is the violence against farmers. I mean, the amount of farmers getting killed on their farms, farm workers, and then that's a big issue for us, is the whole issue of violence. I had the unfortunate opportunity 3 years ago when my neighbor was murdered on his farm, which is just 2 kilometers from my house, a big friend of mine. And you need to go through this emotions. I mean, and I don't think we always realize the big emotions in this. And then another big problem we currently have in South Africa is the theft of scrap metal and the theft of copper cables and those from irrigation systems. But that's a big problem. Then pesticides. In the grain producing areas, that's a big problem. Seeds stolen. And then what we currently also see a lot is vandalism. As people just getting into a farm, into a shed, and they will just start, they will vandalize the equipment, the tractors, and they would vandalize like the batteries and whatever, for whatever reasons we don't know. Those are the things that really are getting us. And then I do think that's where we share a lot with the UK and those kind of people, and I do think with Australia as well, is diesel theft. I mean, that's a big problem all over the world as fuels has been stolen. And yeah, you asked me how I experience it from a farming point of view. Is I do think that when it gets to crime, I tend to put more than a farmer hat on them than an academic hat, and
yeah,
you get more aggravated about the whole about crime, and then you start questioning the police, and you start questioning about the efficiency of the police, and where are they, and why don't they respond? And I think it's normal, but I must acknowledge that I enjoy both worlds. I think the farming, I mean, being a farmer is great, but also doing the academic side is just as rewarding.
Yeah, Carl and I have been discussing this notion of praxis and practice, and the importance of having colleagues in academia who straddle both fields, and it's all about, of course, engagement, and importantly too, around policy change and change to practice, whether it's policing or farmers' behaviour or motivating non-government organisations like the Livestock or the Red Meat Authority and other organisations to step up and do what they possibly can to address the issue.
Yeah. It must be so insightful to straddle both sides too, because, you know, the primary reason here for not reporting is the police won't do anything about it. I reported to the stock squad 4 years ago, still waiting on a phone call, was a quote I got. And so, you know, having some empathy and actual real understanding of that, because then the police say, well, if you don't report it, we can't do anything about it. And us as academics say, well, look at the reporting. It's abysmal. You need to report more for resources. But if you have reported and you've been continually let down, you can see where that kind of deflation of tires would come in, and the lack of confidence and the absence of confidence would just continue that cycle.
I fully agree with your whole summary on that one, Kyle. Is I just had a meeting last week. We had a big complaint from a specific area, farming area, close where I'm farming, close now 100 kilometers away. But these guys and they set up a list of 50 cases that they have a big problem with. And I looked at the list, and I saw this list, and it was cases from 2011. Which is 10 years down the line.
A decade old.
These guys are still inquiring about it. And then we just set up a big meeting with the police and prosecutors and whatever, just to determine that these cases were all closed as undetected.
Yeah.
But the victim was never informed.
Yeah.
So they have never received any closure. So my arguments with the police was all this guy wants to know is what happened. If it's undetected, just inform him.
Yeah.
It will provide closure.
And oftentimes it is just that having that dialogue, that communication, isn't it? But
Yeah.
also importantly, a recognition that it's no single person or organisation's responsibility for crime prevention. The police have a role, farmers themselves have a role. And I think just thinking around crime prevention, in a recent book that I edited last year, you wrote a chapter, and it's really quite groundbreaking, because what you did was take those Cornish and Clark's 25 situation crime prevention measures, which a lot of people listening and watching will be familiar with, but then applying it specifically to livestock theft. And I'm just wondering on that, whether maybe you could just nominate what are the top 2 or 3 things that farms themselves can do to protect themselves from livestock theft.
You know what I do think when it gets to the 25 key issues in situational crime prevention is The first stage is the most important. Count your animals on a regular basis. Mark your animals. And leave your footprints on your farm.
Yes.
Mm.
Those are the three most important. The rest will take care of themselves if those three are in place.
Yes, because it's very difficult for the police to operate on some sketchy information. Oh, I think it could have been 10, it could have been 20, I'm not too sure. I counted them only 6 months ago, but it's near on impossible for them to actually do an investigation then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those are the three most important ones. I want them all. I mean, there's this, just to take it by an example is, if I phone the police and say, they've stolen my sheep, the first question is, how much? I don't know. What's the attitude of the police officer on the other side if you say, I don't know?
Yeah, must not be that important to you.
By means of your example now, it may be 10, it may be 20.
Oh, and the other challenge.
But if you call the police officer and says, you know what, I count my cattle on a regular basis. I counted them on day X. I counted them again today. And this is what happened. This is the scene that I'm seeing. I've seen fences cut and whatever, and it's cut this morning and and there's 15 lost or 15 gone. What's the police officer's attitude? This guy knows his business. He knows what's going on. I'm going there. I have a 90% chance of success in this case. So I'm going to put all my efforts in there.
The other challenge, of course, is actually putting a monetary figure on the loss. So it could be a woolly animal on 4 legs, but it also could be a key stud ram. And how do you take into account all those sunk costs? You know, the years and years and years of building up a bloodline. How do you actually put that?
But now you're opening another can of worms. In your argument is because what we've seen in the courts in South Africa, and this is now from the defense side, is the argument between value and price.
Yeah.
How do you, and then they get into these farmers in cross-examination and asking them, how did you determine the value? What is the science behind it? And then all of a sudden farmers start backpedaling because they cannot answer those questions.
Yeah.
I mean, as we can have a big argument about bloodlines and what we've lost, but it's all imaginary value.
Yeah.
It's not real value.
And of course, those negative experiences at the court will then go through the grapevine, and other farmers will be, in turn, reluctant to report because they don't want to have to go through that process themselves. It becomes a vicious circle.
So what we've, and that's why I say price and value is 2 different definitions. And so now what we do in South Africa currently is the value the price we attach to a stolen livestock is we decided many years ago, we go on an average. So if it's your most expensive bull or your most low value cow or a little calf, we've got one price for all. And that's normally what we would say, depending on our grading system. I mean, Australia's got a different grading system than South Africa, and classification systems, but in our case, it's a fattened cow that's prepared to be slaughtered. That's the value for the price that we take on average, and excuse me, that's how we go about it.
Yeah.
But so there's another argument that we can go and research: value and price.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Alistair.
So I was going to say, if you're the relevant minister for a day, what is one piece of legislation you might change that would improve circumstances in South Africa?
No, it's an easy answer. I would update the laws, because all our current legislation is old, they're old-fashioned, and they didn't keep up with new developments in the world, with new technology. So we have the laws, but they're not up to date anymore. And I do think this is also something that distinguishes us from like Australia. In Australia, I mean, livestock theft is just a common theft. But in South Africa, we have a Stock Theft Act. There's a whole piece of legislation on stock theft. And those have become, they are old, they're not applicable anymore. So I would change that and make it more applicable.
I think the thing that catalyzed this conversation and got it going in the beginning was you sent me an article of a man who was sentenced to quite a significant punishment for stealing cattle. Do you remember that?
Yes, I sent you that one. It was, I think, 8 years imprisonment for 10 years of cattle or whatever.
Yeah, so are the mechanisms much more punitive in South Africa, the response to this type of theft, than say just your traditional normal theft under this different act? Or how were they able to give such a punitive penalty for stock theft?
You know, in that particular case that I sent you, it's a repeat offender. So you go through your motions and you look at the value of the price of the animals in this case. It does require a regional court to hear the case. And when you get to regional courts, they have a much higher jurisdiction. They can sentence up to 15 years, where your normal district courts can only sentence up to 3 years. So in this guy's case, we're talking about repeat offender, the value, etc., and it goes to the regional court. And this judge would simply just say this: I had enough. And I'm going to, but what we had is, I wrote a paper on this one. It's called Environmental Theories in Livestock Theft. I think it was 2015. I wrote a paper on a case that we had of a guy that stole, my mind serves me right now, 160 head of cattle, I don't know how many goats and sheep and whatever. And then he got sentenced to 80 years in prison. He got a 12-year sentence for 12-year sentence each for cattle stolen, and then he got 4 years for all the cases on goat theft and sheep theft. But in essence, it wasn't an 80-year sentence that he received. It was combined to a 16 years sentence, effective. 12 years for all the cattle that he stolen, and then 4 years for all the, this was in 2013. And we just learned that he was released from prison due to COVID. So now, when you get to your farming community, it says, you know what, this guy's been sentenced to 8 years, 16 years effective. It's 8 years down the line, he's out on the streets again. And yeah, we do know that he's busy stealing again.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to what you opened up with about the kind of career criminal trajectory, it seems, in South Africa. Yeah.
So we do get these lengthy sentences, but in essence, they're not that severe. That one that I sent you that time.
Yeah, it was a one-off. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, we get the like very often the 6 years and the 5 years and those kind of sentences. But if I put my farming hat on, I would say it's not enough. You can put them away for 20 years, But if I put my academic hat on, I say, you know what,
yeah.
I think it's a severe sentence.
That's the interesting nexus that you're at. You know, it's easy to be impartial when it doesn't impact you. It's very difficult to, you know, make a value judgment when it actually, you know, is a financial, emotional, psychological impact. And it's hard to stay distant from that, I could imagine.
It is just difficult to imagine these things and whatever, because the irony about it is that I am the organizer of a webinar which is going to be hosted in June on the excessive use of imprisonment in South Africa.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the one hat that you wear, and then you have this other hat that just wants to put these guys away forever and they never want to see them again.
Yeah.
It all gets back to evidence basis, doesn't it? And that's really what we're all about. And we're almost full circle to where we started here and thinking about how ineffective imprisonment is as a deterrent, but also how effective it is as a university of criminality.
Yeah, but thinking from the farmer's perspective too, there's a place for retribution, and that desire to see an offender not punished because it's going to make them better, but just to punish them for the behavior and the harm caused. And that's the tricky part. Like when we were at the town hall, Alistair, launching the Center for Rural Criminology, that's what a few of the farmers piped up and were saying, right? Like, I want to see more punishment. And the whole point was because I want to see them to get their just desserts, you know, an eye for an eye kind of thing.
Oh, and anecdotally here in Victoria, it's the volume of farmers who are really frustrated when they think that, quote, they've just got a slap on the wrist, end quote. Yeah. And it becomes a real issue.
Yeah, which then goes back to your point, blurs the whole conversation even about evidence and whether this works and what we can do and all those types of things.
I mean, I do think that if we look at the whole issue of penology and we look at punishment and all those kind of things, it's one thing that we will never agree on. And I do think the fact that it's such an individual decision by an individual person will always boggle our minds.
Yeah.
How does this person really determine what is he going to do with this criminal? I mean, it's a mind thing. We have all these theories. We have all these elements that needs to be taken into account, and the factors and the personal circumstances and whatever, all those kind of things. But in the end, it remains an individual decision as to what is the punishment going to be. And that's a challenge.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, it's a difficult situation, and depends very much on sentencing guidelines and things like that, which will be different in different jurisdictions. And but if there's a lot of judicial independence around the decision-making factor, and going back to the farmer, that's why they at least traditionally used to keep, I guess, the victim's perspective off to the side almost entirely, so as not to conflate emotion with trying to come to a air quotes appropriate punishment for the particular offense. Now, so Alistair's right. I think we've come pretty full circle. Alistair, did you have anything you wanted to add on that, or anything that we've missed from your end?
Oh, I think just just underlining the key takeaway message that I've taken from the conversation here is that we know a lot, but there's a lot more that we could know. And I think for people who are listening or watching to this podcast or podcast and interested in research, then there's any number of opportunities wherever you happen to be in the world, so that we can continue to build our body of knowledge.
Yeah, Willie, what I'll do is on the description of this video, I'll add a few of your recent papers that we've talked about. That way any viewers can actually go and explore the issue in South Africa and your work a little bit further. But before we end, is there any kind of topics or issues that we haven't covered that you think might be really interesting or important that we could touch on?
I think we covered a lot. Maybe I will think of others in future, and I will get back to you guys and say, I think we can talk about this, we can talk about that. But it was a good it was a good opportunity just to introduce it to the world.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
For the rest to see.
Yeah, very important. And ik spreek klein beetje Nederlands, and I know Nederlands is close with Afrikaans, so I might be able to understand a little bit of those papers.
Yeah, I do think Afrikaans is one of those difficult languages in the sense that it's a big combination, a little bit of dominance from the Netherlands, but there's a big dominance of English.
Yeah.
And it's just we spell the words exactly the same. It's just the pronunciations that there's a difference, and then you have the influences of all the traditional languages in the country. So it's not that easy to understand. But
did you say it's written similar to Dutch though?
No, it's not that.
No.
Similar. No, it's not that similar. But and what I've found for myself is if you try and put it into Google Translate,
yeah, it doesn't happen.
That's the biggest mess up that you will ever find. So
I try that with Dutch, and that doesn't work either. So my partner's Dutch, so I get a lot of Dutch coming through, and Google Translate's not much of your friend.
But what we can do is, if you do see something and you are interested in like a title or whatever, then give me a shout and we can talk about it.
Okay, you can give me the Coles notes of it, the short description.
Yeah, we can do that.
Fair enough.
But thanks for spending your Monday evening. I mean, for me, it's still morning.
Yeah, it's 5:15 over here, so.
Yeah, it's what 9:15, and I sat and watched the Masters last night.
Yeah.
I overstayed my welcome in front of the TV last night. So,
yeah, I'm a big hockey fan, so I'm all too familiar with staying up at 2 a.m. to watch a game, especially during playoffs.
Yeah, but you're a true Canadian then.
That's it. Can't help myself. And sometimes it's nice. It ends up being Sunday morning with your coffee instead of Saturday night with too many beers. So it works out better for one's health.
Much better.
Yeah. But hey, thanks so much for this conversation. It's something we wanted to get together for a long time, something that's near to dear to Alistair and my heart as well, and the research we do. So thanks so much for providing us with your insight and knowledge. It's absolutely fascinating. The work you do is amazing. And we look forward to hearing more and having further conversations.
Okay. I will pass on some photos to you guys.
Good on you. Thanks so much, Willie.
Sounds good. Thanks, Willie.
See you guys. Bye.
Talk soon.
Bye.